some bread, some cakes, whatever's open. I want to welcome you. So welcome tonight to Ladies Inspiration Night. It's so good to see everyone here. We've got a lot of people, a big crowd. Wow. How many of you have been here before? Raise your hand. How many are new? Just one. Okay, welcome and welcome back. So tonight we have our speaker is to share her testimony. It is Sister Beck's daughter, Nancy Mills. And so, Sister Beck, raise your hand so we can see who you are. But they might not know you. She's right here, Sister Beck.
Sorry, Sister Beck. There you go. Owner.
There she is. Proud mama. But we're so happy to have you, Nancy. And I've not met you before, and I'm excited to hear your testimony. And I'm just going to read. It says, you can trust God with everything. No matter what life throws at us, we can trust Him. What a statement. So I'm looking forward to hearing about this testimony. Let's welcome Nancy Mills.
Yay! My ornery friends are all here tonight and family. So we thought it'd be good. I don't know if my mother will want to claim me after this as I tell some stories on her, but she's going to have to anyway. She's going to have to love me. My dad, as you know, was a pastor for many, many years, and he always started his sermons with a joke. Now, if you all remember, they usually were the dumbest jokes you've ever heard, okay? So I'm going to follow in his footsteps. All right. So a wife invited some people to dinner and had worked hard all day preparing for it. At the table, she turned to their 6-year-old daughter and said, honey, would you like to say the blessing? The little girl said, I wouldn't know what to say, Mommy. Well, just say what you hear Mommy say. So the little girl bowed her head and said, oh, Lord, why on earth did I invite all these people to dinner? That's about as bad as my dad's joke, let me tell you. So I thought, it's May, we think of Mother's Day and Moms. So I wanted to share some things that will be familiar to you, things that our mothers taught us, okay? My mother taught me logic because I said so. That's why. My mother taught me stamina. You will sit there until you eat all your food. There are children all around the world that would just love to have your food. My mother taught me anticipation. You just wait till we get home. My daughter was good at this one because we tell her that, and then she'd act like on the way home from church like she was sound asleep. Never worked, by the way. Okay. My mother taught me irony. Keep crying, and I will give you something to cry about. My mother taught me justice. I hope you have kids that turn out just like you. I think Mother did too, didn't you, Mother? Some more logic. Always wear clean underwear in case you get in an accident. Didn't we all hear that? Yes. My mother taught me how to dress. She taught us that if you have a dress that has a cowl neck and it's a knit dress and it looks the same in the front or the back, you can wear it either way. But if you're at a wedding or you're somewhere and you feel something itching and you look down, she made a point of it. Oh, my dress is on backwards. She taught us how to dress. How about this one? If you fall out of that tree and break both legs, don't come running to me. And what part of no don't you understand? I think we've all said that. My mother also taught me that there's no need to warm up the car on a very cold day. I remember sitting in the living room. My dad and I were both sitting on the couch. And my mother come flying through like she always did, okay? And she was like, gotta run to the store, I'll be right back. And she just went flying out the door. Now, it was very, very cold outside. And so my dad said, oh, I got to tell her to warm up the car. He jumped up, he went to the door and said, be sure, and he looked at you already down the street. So I learned you don't need to warm your car. And one more, all of us girls learned, our mother would tell us, honey, you are so beautiful. And this was after she had cut her bangs, very short, very crooked, and then put sponge rolls. Did anybody else's mother do that? Remember, there'd be clear. And you're so beautiful. So, anyways. So for a little background, as you know, I grew up in a pastor's home. I had 3 sisters. My sister Rhonda is here tonight. Our sister Brenda is in heaven with Jesus, and you heard my mom share that testimony. And my baby sister, Darlene, lives in South Carolina. Now, I've been told by them that I was bossy. I don't remember that, but that's what they've told me, okay? But I think Ron could out-boss me now. She bosses me around. But yeah, we just cleaned out my dad's garage, and I cannot believe how much we accomplished in 4 hours. And trust me, if it had been me, we wouldn't have accomplished near that, because I would have taken a break every half hour and gone in and put my feet up. But nope, we worked that hard at it. So we grew up in a preacher's home. Can't say that was always easy. You feel like that you're in the spotlight all the time. Everybody's watching you to see if you're going to mess something up, or, and all this stuff. And my parents were very strict. I can remember I had to wear my skirts down to a certain length. And I remember leaving the house and walking to school and kind of rolling them up as I go to school, and I'm like, oh, I'm rolling back down. That was about the most rebellious I got, but, I did do a little bit of that. And being in a Pentecostal home wasn't always popular. Being Assembly of God back then wasn't popular, So you have to take a stand, But I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change it for anything. We had lots and lots of love in our home. We knew our parents loved us, but we saw them love other people too. The young people in our church were always at our house, and they were loved on just like they were part of our family. And I saw that, and we learned a lot. And we learned that Mom and Dad were the real deal. So here, I'll brag on you for a minute, Mom, since I already told stories about you. But they were. They didn't live one life in front of the church and another life at home. They were who they said they were. They loved Jesus with their whole heart, and all the time at home, So we learned a lot. I love to pull pranks, and I'll have to say I get that from my mother. She taught me a lot when it came to pulling pranks. I remember one summer, and I don't know if anybody here was part of it or not, but the doorbell would ring, and my mother would go and peek out the window to see who it was. Now, if it was somebody that was a good friend or somebody she wanted to pick on, she'd run out the back door, turn the water hose on, and spray them. So, yeah, that's where we learned to pull pranks. And I've always loved to pull pranks. I still do to this day. I met my husband at church, and thought he was the most handsome guy I'd ever met. Shirley knows, because we played together in the school choir, and we both played piano, and so she had to hear about Jack this and Jack that, and all the time. I got so sick of hearing his name. But he stole my heart, He was just the most handsome guy, and we got married in 1972, and I remember he was kind of shy. Now, those of you that knew him for many years, you probably wouldn't remember this about him, but he was kind of shy, okay? And he definitely was not a prankster at all. And in fact, he was always trying to get me to calm down and not pull pranks. But I talked him into pulling one prank. And a couple had gotten married, and so a whole bunch of us decided we were going to go to their trailer. They lived in a trailer park, and we were going to TP their trailer, okay? So there were several of us, and I drug my husband along, made him go. Well, luckily, one of the couples that was with us also lived in the trailer park. Now, when I think back, that was the dumbest thing we ever did. Here you are, a whole group of about 8 of you, sneaking through a trailer park in the dark. Now, how dumb is that? But anyways, all of a sudden this guy came out of the trailer with a shotgun. And we just froze. I just remember Jack's like, what in the world did you get me into? And the one girl that lived in the trailer park happened to know him and told him, what we were doing. And so he put his shotgun away. That was the last prank my husband ever had to be a part of. Life continued. Our daughter Julie was born in 1974. I thought she was the most beautiful little baby that's ever been on this earth. She had a perfectly little, and I think everyone thinks their children are the most beautiful. And she just had a beautiful little round face, good temperament. She stole our hearts right at the very beginning. And she was spoiled rotten. My sisters, Rhonda and Darlene, were still at home at that time, and they spoiled her rotten. They were good aunties. Loved her dearly. Still do. She's my best friend today. I have lots of best friends, but I'd have to say Julie's probably my best friend. And I miss her when I don't get to see her very often. Well, 2.5 years later, David was born. And you know how you anticipate and you have all these plans, well, maybe when my child grows up, they'll be a doctor, or they'll be a lawyer. Maybe they'll be the next president of the United States. But what we don't expect to hear is your child is handicapped, your child has Down syndrome. And I remember somebody giving me a story once that was about a couple that were planning a trip to Italy. And they planned this trip and all the exotic places they were going to go and see. And then all of a sudden, when they got to the airplane said, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to detour. Instead, we're taking you to Holland. And that's where you'll be staying for the next week. And the story went on to say, the family was disappointed because they wanted to go. But then they got to Holland. Was laid back, a little quieter, not quite as exciting and all that, but they discovered it was beautiful. And it was a beautiful trip. Well, I think that's kind of what we discovered. Life wasn't exactly what we planned. And I remember thinking, Lord, I don't know what his life's going to be like. What's going to happen to him when he grows up? What will he be able to do? And some worry in there, but then he learns, Lord, I've got to trust you with this, okay? And David has taught us so much. He has taught me what unconditional love really is. Because he'll tell you, he could meet you for the first time, and he'll say, I love you. You are my best friend. And he means that. Now, he may go and tell the next person next to you the very same thing. But you know what I mean? You give him love, he unconditionally loves you, And I've learned that from him. He's taught me what pure joy is, that it doesn't have to be the big things in life, that sometimes littlest things in life mean the world to him, And I've learned to take joy in little things, and just see the joy on his face. He's taught me patience. Let me tell you, he has taught me patience. He has to be the most stubborn person I have ever met on this earth. And if he doesn't want to do something, you're going to tell him that he's going to do it, And then his latest thing is he got a blood clot. which was really bad, and he still has a blood clot, but he's walking fine now, and we got an exercise bike, and he's doing things to help him with that. But there was about 3 weeks there that he couldn't hardly walk. So I just waited on him hand and foot, you know. Well, then it was like, okay, you're doing better, you gotta get up and you get moving. Well, his famous saying, if you ask him to do anything, is, Mom, I got blood clot leg. And I'll say, yeah, but you're supposed to be out moving, but I got blood clot leg. And I said, get up, get moving, you know. So, yeah, he is stubborn. He's taught me how to be embarrassed, because, trust me, he's embarrassed us more than once in a lifetime. And some of you know exactly, because you have been there when he's done or said something that was embarrassing. He's hard of hearing. He wears 2 hearing aids, which most of the time he doesn't even wear, okay? But he only catches little pieces of conversation, okay? So what you talked about in the conversation you had may not be at all what he got, all right? You may have said, oh, I really feel bad for so-and-so, you know, their uncle died of this. Well, he's allowed to get on the phone and say, so-and-so died, you know, he only picks up little pieces. So that can be real challenging. But he's also taught me what compassion is. And I think one of the best stories of that is years ago we had a couple come to our church in Angola. I do not know their names. I don't know who they were. Somebody might remember them. But the man had a stroke. And it was pretty severe on one side. His face really drooped. He couldn't use his arm. He drooled. He just, had a really bad stroke. And they'd been out for several weeks. And they came to church one Sunday. His wife brought him in a wheelchair. Well, I looked, and there were several of us adults standing around. And your heart went out to this man. But it was like, you didn't know how to communicate with you. You didn't know what to do. I felt dumb at that moment. It's like, Lord, how do we let this man know we care, And David was probably 6, 7, 8, he was just little at the time. And I looked, and he crawled up in that man's lap. He wrapped his little arms, and I forget it, he wrapped his little arms around this man's neck. And that man just began to cry. And I thought, here we were, adults, intelligent adults, and not a one of us could figure out how to minister to this man. And here's a little handicapped boy that gave him exactly what he needed that day. So he taught me what compassion. I saw him one day, we were at a restaurant, and a family was sitting right across from us, and they had a little girl that had Downs. And she was just pitching a fit and crying, and her parents couldn't get her calmed down. And David goes, I'll be right back. And he got out of his seat, and he walked over there, and he just started, what is that? He started talking to her, and it was the little girl almost like, oh, well, you're just like me, And she just calmed down. And he went back, sat down, and he turned around, he'd wave at her, and I thought, I learned so much from him. Life goes on.
I enjoy him too.
Huh?
I enjoy him too.
Yes. He's very free with his hugs. And David, you're allowed to get a hug and a kiss from him. Life goes on, and Jack's company, it seemed like every year or so, he'd get laid off. And I have to admit, back then, I'm worried. It was like, he'd come home, he'd slip, and I'd say, what are we going to do? How are we going to feed our family? We lived from paycheck to paycheck. We didn't have a lot of money. And you fretted and stewed and wondered how you were going to make it. And yet, every time, God provided. We never went without food. We had a roof over our head. We had heat. There was times when we didn't buy anything except for what we had to have. But God supplied our needs. And every time that happens, your faith begins to grow. the more that things happen and you see God take you through it, the more you learn that you can trust Him. And I think every time it was just like it was a growing process. My faith grew. And then he came home. We were living in Ohio, and we'd been married 30 years. 35, I forget which. But we came home, we'd been away for our anniversary, and there was a message on the answering machine. He works for Consolidated Freight, and it was a message that said, don't come to work. We've closed our doors. He's gone bankrupt. Excuse me, got my water. Jody told me I was going to need it. And I remember looking at Jack and going, it's okay. God's got this. He looked at me and goes, what did you do with my wife? Because he knew I was always worried and fretting about that. But see, I'd seen God move every single time. And so when this happened, it was like, okay, God, you've been there every step of the way. You're going to be there for this. And he was. I'm not going to say it was easy. But he helped us through all that. Well, then about 9 years ago, our daughter Julie and her family moved to Oregon. Oh, that was all my grandchildren. They lived 10 minutes away, and now they were moving clear across country. You can't get any farther away than that. And I was heartbroken. I was absolutely heartbroken. And it was like, Lord, we're going to have to place them in your hands. And we're going to have to trust that you're going to watch over them. You know, as a parent, you want to be the one to watch over them. You want to be the one to help them and to do things. That's just natural for a parent. But when we're living clear in Oregon, it's a little hard to do. And it was like, Lord, we're going to have to trust you. And he's been there. He's been there with them and helped them every step of the way. They've lived out there now 9 years, and they're doing good. In May of 2017, I retired from the music ministry after 50 years. I was a baby when I started. Actually, I was 12 years old, and I remember our piano player had left, and I was taking piano lessons. I could play 8 hymns. That's the extent of what I could play church-wise. And my dad said, Nancy, you're right. He said, we have no one. You're going to have to play. I could play 8 hymns exactly as they were written. Okay? But it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I was determined I was not going to stay playing 8 hymns exactly as they were written. My dad would sit there and pick out a chorus that he would plunk. He'd plunk them, and I would hear him. And then I could figure it out, and I figured out chords to go with it. And they took me to the music director at Fort Wayne First Assembly, and she was a very talented piano player. And she taught me to start adding stuff, to do all that stuff. So I was involved in music ministry for 50 years, and I retired in May of 2017. A week later, we flew to Oregon. Our grandson graduated from high school. Jack just had not been feeling real good, and he was having trouble swallowing. Sometimes he would go down, sometimes he just couldn't hardly get to go down. And I don't remember, Mom twice had to have her esophagus stretched because she had trouble with that. So our thought was, oh, he probably has the same thing. He's going to need to get his esophagus stretched. And he said, well, as soon as we get home, I'm going to make an appointment with the doctor and see about getting that done, We got home, and it was like a week later, and he went up to the hospital. Well, they said, we're going to do a scope. One of those things, we're going to put you to sleep and put a scope down in your throat to see what's going on. So I went out, and I remember they took me to the little waiting room, and they said, now, you can just stay here, but you won't see him. We don't let you come back or anything like that. They said, we'll let you know when they have him back settled in his room, and you can go back to his room. I said, okay. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, they came out and they said, you can go on back. well, wait a minute, they told me I couldn't go back, you know? But they said, come on back. I went back there, and the doctor was standing there, and he just said, I'm so sorry. And he said, I'm so very sorry. He said, we found a huge malignant tumor at the top of his stomach where your stomach connects with your esophagus, which is why he was having trouble eating. And it was just getting worse all the time. And he said, you know, Dr. Oncology will be in to see you in a little bit. You know, it almost doesn't register, you know, when somebody gives you news like that. I remember just kind of standing there. It was kind of shocked, you know. It's like, what did he say? You know? Well, the doctor came in a little bit later, and he said, you know, because it's huge. And he had the pictures. I still have the pictures. It was huge, you know. And he said, we said, well, can you operate on it? And he said, no, not really. He said, the only thing the only way you'd ever operate is if he took chemo, the hardest chemo we have, and he did that. He said, it might shrink it a little bit, maybe enough that we could take out his entire stomach, and he wouldn't have a stomach anymore. But he said that would be best scenario. Best scenario, you know. And he said, well, what are his prognosis, you know, if he takes chemo? Well, it might prolong him for just a few months, probably. And Jack goes, but I'm going to be sick the whole time. Well, yeah. And I didn't say anything because it was Jack's decision. You know, I would support him either way. And I remember getting home. How I got home, I have no idea. I did not drive in the city at that time. Now I drive I've been all over driving and getting around. But at that time, I was married to a truck driver. I didn't drive. Anytime he crawled in the car and went anywhere, he drove. So here we are downtown Cleveland, and I've got to drive home by myself because they're keeping him. Bawling so hard. I was like, I think, you know that song, Jesus Take the Wheel? I think he must have taken the wheel, because how in the world I ever made it out of Cleveland and get on the high freeway that would have taken me back to Medina, I have no idea. But I did, you know. And I no more than got home, and Jack called me and he said, I'm not doing chemo. He said, I don't want to spend it. If God's choice is to take me home, he said, I'm not spending it sick of the dog the whole time. He said, I would rather spend it, be able to just spend that time with my family and everything. And he said, well, God heals me, then I'm healed, you know? And Jack had an unshakable faith. You know, we have to make a choice when things happen in our life. We can absolutely fall to pieces and crumble. And I'm not saying, like I said, I'm not saying there weren't tears shed and a lot of crying and pleading with God, Lord, healing. You know, I want to keep you, you know. But we have to make a choice. Do we crumble or do we trust God? And at that moment, Jack and I both looked at each other, and it's like, we got to trust God for this. I don't know what his plan is. Don't know what the future. I believe in divine healing. I believe in it today. I have a grandson who can see because God divinely healed his eyes. He was a baby, and it was obvious his eyes were not moving. He was not seeing anything. He was about that time maybe 6 months old. And my daughter and son-in-law took him to a neurologist and an eye specialist for children, and they both said the same thing, that his optic nerve had never developed. And they said, once a child's born, it will never develop any more than that. We went to prayer. And one Sunday morning, our pastor asked if anybody wanted prayer. And my daughter took baby up, and they prayed for him. So they came back, and anybody who knew Jack knew he was a baby person. If there was a baby around, he was holding it. I don't care who you are. If you walked in, we had a lady who had twins. She walked in the church. She'd walk in the door and hand one of them to Jack, and he'd carry the baby around until church time started. He was a baby person. So Julie came back and sat down, and her dad was right over there, and she handed Grant to Papa, and Jack held him up and was looking in his eyes and talking to him. In Grant's eyes, he just looked looked at Jack, and he grinned from ear to ear. And you know, they took him back to the doctor, and the doctors were like, I don't understand this. This can't be. You can't, your optic nerve can't develop after the child's born. But yet, his did. He's played basketball in high school. He's done absolutely great. So I believe in divine healing, And in Jack, it was just, he went downhill fast. You hope you'll have a lot of time, but I never saw him waver in his faith. Jack was 19 or 20 when he got saved. He came from a very rough background, and when I went to a school reunion once, and they were describing him, I was like, wait a minute, that's not my Jack. Out racing the cops, drinking until he was just stone drunk, and all this, and it was like, that's not the man I know. But the night his friend introduced him to Jesus, and he gave his life over, Jack says, I felt like for the very first time in my life, I was worth something. He never felt. His mom would tell him, you're not worth the powder to take to blow your brains out. That's what his mother would tell him. And he said, I knew I was somebody. I now belong to Jesus. I was somebody. He never wavered in his faith. And even as I saw him go downhill physically, his faith never wavered. You'd put on worship music, and he'd be laying there, and his hands would be in the air, tears rolling down his face, just worshiping the Lord, He loved him so much. And he knew, he said, I'm a winner either way. He said, God heals me, and I get to spend a lot more years. He goes, I'm a winner. But he said, Jesus takes me home. I'm a winner. And he went downhill, couldn't eat hardly anything. So he just started really just getting weaker and weaker. One thing he could hardly eat, he discovered that he could eat shrimp. Don't ask me why, but I had to buy raw shrimp, cook it in a lot of butter, and for some reason, I think it just chewed up so fine, and it would slide down. So we ate shrimp almost daily. We ate shrimp, because that's what he could eat. And every day, I found myself saying, Lord, I trust you. Don't understand all this. Don't know what's going to happen, but I trust you. We need to say that. We need to speak words of life. On Thursday, October the 5th, they sent us a different hospice nurse than we had had. And she came in and she took care of Jack. And she pulled me aside and she said, has anybody talked to you? And I said, what do you mean? She said, has anybody really talked to you about what's what's happening? And I said, well, not really. She goes, how long have his eyes been like that? And they were black. And he had the most beautiful brown puppy dog eyes, I call them. I always told him, I fell in love with your eyes first. He just had these big, sad puppy dog eyes. But they were just like coal black and glazed over. And she said, how long has he been like that? And I said, well, a few days I've noticed, She said, I'm going to be honest with you. She said, I've never seen anybody, once their eyes glazed over like that, to last more than 2 weeks. That was like, I thought, maybe we've got 3-6 months here, I don't know, And then to tell me that, and I'm counting thinking, well, how many days have they been like that? We don't have much time unless God intervenes. And we had done so well. I had done so well. And I can say honestly, I'd had a peace all along. I just felt like God was there. I just could feel that, The next day on Friday evening, it was like all of a sudden it hit me. It kind of breaks, I think. And I remember all of a sudden, it was like my stomach just went, I went flying up the stairs, heaving, and I was shaking. And I think it was just shock. It hit me. It was like all of a sudden, it was like, God, unless God intervenes, I'm losing my husband, you know? And my mom and dad had come, were staying, and my mom came up to check on me because I was sitting by Jack's side. He didn't want me to leave him. I mean, you sat beside his bed and held his hand 24/7. I mean, I had to pull the hospital bed against the couch so that I could get a few minutes of sleep while I'm holding his hand. You know, that's kind of how it gone. And she came up to check on me because Jack was like, where's Nancy? And she saw the condition I was in. She went down and told my dad, you go sit with Jack, you know. And came up and she just prayed with me. And I remember Mom saying, you have to tell him it's okay to go home. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I want my husband. I've had him for 45 years. I'm not ready to give him up. You know, I don't want to say that, you know. She's like, but you need to tell him that it's okay. And I lay down and slept for a little bit, and I went back down, and middle night, he just was tossing and turning and restless, and you could tell he was in misery, just pure misery. And at one point, he said, I just want to go home. And I was like, okay, Lord, you know, hardest words I have ever spoken in my life, to tell him it's okay. You could go home to Jesus. I said, we'll be okay. God is going to take care of us. I'm going to be fine. David's going to be fine. Julie's going to be fine. We're okay. You can go home. And you know, 3 hours later, he went home to Jesus. He was a winner. You know, he left here. The Bible said to be absent in the body is to be present with the Lord. So the minute he left earth, he was in glory. He was in heaven. I didn't doubt that. And so some people doubt, and I wonder where my loved one went. I never doubted that because I knew the love he had for Jesus. I know what he's doing. And I have to tell you this. The one thing I always said, Lord, I just wish I could see him. I wish I knew what he was doing in heaven. I wonder what's going on up there. Have you ever wondered that about a loved one? Yeah, I just kept praying. I never told anybody that, but I just kept praying. Well, the next summer, my dad was going through a physical thing, and we were really worried about him. You know, we didn't know at that point what was going to happen with Dad. And the whole family had come to my house, and we had our own little church on Sunday morning. We were all there. And Dad, he was never one to be given to, like, visions and all that. He never said that. But you just didn't hear him. But he sat there in front of the whole family, and he said, he's wondering, how long do I have? How long am I going to be here on earth? And he said, I just wondered, what is ahead? And he said, plain as day, God gave me a vision. And he said, I could see Jack. And he said there was just this glow around him. He was kneeling, he had his hands in the air, and he was worshiping. Now, my dad had no idea that was my prayer. Lord, if I could just know for sure. I know he's fine with you, but I wish I could just know, God gave me that, through my dad, with him not even realizing or knowing that. I'm not going to tell you it's been easy every step of the way. There's been a lot of tears shed, trust me. But I have learned I can trust him. I can trust him. I've seen him work every day. He never promised us that we'd have a life full of flowers and giggles and everything would just be great. He's never promised that. But he's always promised that he would never leave us. He would never forsake us. And I have seen him in every step of the way. Well, I had to make some hard decisions. And one was I house, now me and David, and it was a big house, 4 levels, and 5 acres. And of course, Jack had this huge garden. Every time I looked at there, he was plumbing up more of the yard for more garden. I finally had to go out one day and say, stop, no more. You know, how in the world are we going to take care of this garden? And yeah, so we had this huge garden, and we had a huge yard to mow and everything. I kept it up I didn't keep the garden up, but I kept the yard up. And my son-in-law said, you know, Mom, he said, houses are really going good. You need to consider selling your house. But every time I thought about it, it was like I could look out the window and picture Jack with his big rototiller. He'd wear these ugly black shorts that he had and his flip-flops. And then he had this pink, it was red to begin with, pink tank top that he'd had for over 15 years. I tried to throw it away several times. He would not. Every time I went to throw it away, he discovered it and would pull it out and say, you don't throw it away. That is my garden shirt. You know. So every time I would look out my window, I could just picture him walking across the yard with that shirt on and just proud as can be. He had this big rototiller, which Mark is using now because I could not part with it. That was Jack's baby, his big rototiller. And I could picture that, and I would just cry. And it was so finally I had to tell my son-in-law, I'm not ready. When God says it's time, He's going to give me peace, and I'm going to know it's time. So a little over a year ago, I just started thinking about summer, thinking about that big lawn, and I was like, this is getting to be too much. And I could look and I could think about it without breaking down and crying. And God gave me a peace, just a real peace. And so I called Mom and Dad and I said, you know, I'm going to sell my house and move home. You're getting older. You need help. And I said, Rhonda's got her hands full. And then trying to do everything that, you know, they needed help with. It was like, it's time for me to come home and help too. And so I came over and talked to a realtor and I said, I'm going to be selling my house. And houses were selling, boom, 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 you know. And she said, well, good luck finding anything over here to buy. She said, there's just probably nothing. They're going way above value. And I said, well, what about rentals? She said, I don't know of any rentals. She said, there's just no rentals. So in my mind, I'm thinking, oh boy, we're going to have to move in with Mom, Dad, and I love my parents, don't get me wrong. My own space, my own stuff, you know. And we even were checking around to see, well, if we had to do that, could we store my stuff somewhere? There was nothing. I think my mom even called Irene and said, hey, you got anything? There was nothing. And I'm like, Lord, what in the world am I going to do? You know, where's my stuff going to go? I'm going to be piled in and you know, I could just picture this. Well, I'm over here visiting so the lady came out and took pictures, and she said, oh, your house can sell. She said, no problem whatsoever. And so we had planned, pictures were taken, and on that Friday, it was going to go live, okay? Well, I'm at Mom's, and I think it was either Wednesday or Thursday. Wednesday, and I'm at Mom's, and Ronnie comes flying in the door. Now, you all know Ronnie. Right? So she goes, oh, Nancy, gotta get over there. There's a house for rent. It was right there on Fox Lake Road down the street from her. And I'm kind of like, okay, I'll check it. She goes, no, you need to do it now. I'm like, okay, Rhonda speaks, I move. So I jumped up and I got my car and I went over there. Well, he had the sign, but nobody was around. So I called the number and made an appointment for Thursday to go see the house. It's a duplex, okay? So we all prayed. We went to prayer. The whole family was praying for this because it was like, we need a place to live, you know. So Thursday I went and looked at it. It was perfect. Absolutely perfect for David and I. Right down the street. I'm loving it because my nieces walk down and raid the snack box and come visit me. And I love where I'm at. But I said, we want it. You know, we'll take it. And he said, I've got some other people. He said, I'll make a decision by the end of the weekend. So Friday, my house went live. Saturday morning, the realtor called me and she said, we have an offer, and it's a good offer. And she told me what it was and everything. I said, well, let me call my sister Darlene. She's a realtor. And let her look at all the papers and come back. So I sent everything, emailed it to her. She looked at everything, and she called me back. She goes, sis, it's a good offer. You need to take it. So I told the lady, I said, yep, I'll take it. And I still didn't know where I was going to live at this point. Okay? So electronically, you sign now. You just sign through email and all that stuff. And I left the house and I went out to Walmart. I'm in Walmart, my phone rings. Guess who it was? It was the landlord. He said, do you still want the duplex? I said, absolutely. He goes, it's yours. Within a 24-hour period, I sold my house and I had a rental. Now that isn't God. I don't know what is, So, God, we can trust him. He is looking out for us at all times. I've had people say, well, how can you trust a God who allowed your husband to die of cancer and didn't heal him? Well, he did heal him. He did heal him in the way I wanted him to heal me. I miss him every day. I wanted to grow old with him, and travel. We wanted to get a little RV and travel, and all this. But he did heal him. There's three. I just want to give you three reasons why we can trust him. He's already proved he's trustworthy. Romans 5:8 says, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Now, who does that? Who does that for people who don't even love him, who are sinners, and to take on all the sins of the world, to leave heaven and do that? He's trustworthy. The second is, the next generation needs hope. We're living in a world that doesn't have a lot of hope right now. And if you just look at what's going on, you'd be very afraid and very worried. Psalm 70, 16 through 18. I just read this the other day, and it hit me as I was doing this. Since my youth, O God, you have taught me, and to this day I declare your marvelous deed. Even when I am old and gray, yes, I don't know about the old part, but gray, yes. Do not forsake me, O God. So I declare your power to the next generation and your might to all who will come. We have an obligation to share those experiences. I tell my grandson, I don't know how many times I reminded him, he'd play basketball or something. I say, Grant, don't you ever forget that you're out there playing basketball because Jesus healed your eyes. It was a miracle. The doctor said it was a miracle. It could not happen, and yet it did. Don't you ever forget that Jesus healed your eyes. You can trust him, They need to know that. They hear so much negative at school and at work and the news. You turn on the news. Be careful as parents, as grandparents and everything. Get that positive in there. Yes, I'm not saying hide our heads in a bushel basket and not hear what's going on or not let our kids need to know some of what's going on. But give them the positive. Give them the hope that comes with Jesus. Think, yes, that news wasn't very good. That looks awfully tough. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I do know this. I know who holds my tomorrow. I know who I can trust in, and he has never failed me. They need to hear that. And thirdly, trusting God brings peace and joy. One of my favorite verses is Philippians 4, 6, and 7. It says, do not be anxious about anything. That means don't worry, don't fret, don't get all worked out about anything. But in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. I love the next part. And the peace of God that transcends all understanding. I used to tell my girls' ministry, when we'd study that verse, I said, that means when it doesn't make sense to have peace. When you should be worried, you should be scared and full of fear, you can still have peace. And his peace will guard our hearts and our minds. And we can have joy. I just memorize this verse, but sometimes I get some of them a little mixed up. It takes a little longer to memorize the older you get. Do you notice that? If you try to memorize something, it takes long. 1 Peter 1:8, it says, though you have not seen him, you love him. And though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. For you are receiving the goal of your faith, the salvation of your soul. Ooh, that just gives me chills when I think about that. You know, I'm receiving that joy. I'm receiving that goal of my faith. He saved me. He redeemed me when I did not deserve it. And you know, to trust someone, you got to get to know them. If a stranger walked up to me and said, hey, you need to follow me. You're in danger. You need to follow me. I'd be like, no, wait a minute. I don't know you. I don't know that I can trust. I'm not following you somewhere. But if my dad came up and said, Nancy, you need to follow me. You're in danger. We got to go. You need to follow me. I'd be right behind you. Because I've learned I can trust my dad. I've learned I can trust Jesus because I've got to know him. He is my Lord and Savior. He's proved himself over and over again. You know, the most important decision we will ever make in our life is to follow Jesus. That's not the easiest decision. Asking Jesus to come into your heart is easy. But to follow him isn't always the easiest path. You know, the Bible says take up your cross and follow him. And sometimes it's tough to be a Christian. It's tough to be, you know, in the workplace sometime and to live for Christ when everybody around you is talking, thinking differently than you are. It isn't always easy to take your stand and live for Christ. But it's the best decision. I made that as a child, and I have never once regretted giving my life to Christ. And I can't imagine living one single day without him. I can imagine trying to do life without Jesus. I can trust him. You can trust him. I just want to pray with you. And maybe you're having a tough time trusting. Maybe you're going through things that have just shattered your world, you know. Sometimes we lose jobs, we lose income, someone we love dies. There's so many things that can just, you know. And it's not that God understands. We have times when we question, God, why did you do that? We begin to speak the words of life. Say, Lord, I don't understand this. You know, I wish you'd gone a different direction, but your ways are higher. You know what you're doing. And I trust you. I trust you. I just want to pray with you. Heavenly Father, Lord, we love you so much. And I'm so thankful, Lord, that you were willing to come and pay the price, God, that you were willing to leave the splendor of heaven to come to earth because you knew that I needed you. You knew that every lady here needed you. And Lord, I'm so thankful for that. And I'm so thankful that you walk with us every day when we allow you to be Lord of our life. That you're there every step of the way. You never leave us. You never forsake us. Yeah. Lord, you said, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. So Lord, even when we go through the toughest things in our life that we don't think we can get through on our own, we don't have to, because you walk through those valleys with us. And I'm so thankful. Lord, I pray for each lady. Lord, you know where they're at in their relationship with you. You know what they struggle with. And Lord, I pray that they would allow you to be Lord of their life. They would, Lord, trust you. Begin to speak those words. Begin to, Lord, even when things look bad, begin to trust you, Lord God, because you do have their back, Lord Jesus. And I just thank you for that. I thank you for this opportunity to share your word. Your word is life. And I just thank you and I praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Yes. Awesome. I joined you in that prayer. I joined you in the prayer. We prayed about trusting Him. And if you did that tonight, too, tell somebody. Tell your neighbor that's sitting next to you. I prayed that prayer tonight. Because I need to rebuild trust again in some areas of my life. You know, we go through stuff. And thank you so much for sharing. And we need to share with each other. We need to get to know each other again and to be vulnerable in the areas where we're hurting. So I just want to encourage you to just share with your neighbor here at the table. And also don't forget to share tonight with some bread or some snacks to take home with your neighbor or for yourself or a friend or family. And thank you, Nancy, for sharing. Thank you.